Marcus Rodriguez pulled his worn duffel bag from the trunk of his rental car and felt the familiar weight of exhaustion settling into his bones. The Phoenix heat beat down mercilessly as he stood in the parking lot of the Grand Vista Hotel, a mid-range establishment that promised comfort and accessibility. His service dog, a golden retriever named Atlas, jumped down from the passenger seat and immediately moved to Marcus's left side, positioning himself perfectly to provide balance support. The veteran's prosthetic leg ached from the long drive. From San Diego, where he had just completed another round of physical therapy at the VA hospital, Marcus had been traveling for nearly 8 hours, and all he wanted was a hot shower, a decent meal, and a good night's sleep before continuing his journey home to Colorado the next morning. Atlas, sensing his handler's fatigue, pressed gently against Marcus's leg in the practiced gesture that had become second nature to both of them over the past 3 years. Marcus had lost his left leg below the knee during his final deployment in Afghanistan, when an improvised explosive device tore through his patrol vehicle. 3 of his team members didn't make it home that day, and Marcus carried their memory with him everywhere he went. Atlas had been specially trained to help him navigate the physical challenges of his injury, but the dog had become so much more than just a mobility aid. The golden retriever helped manage Marcus's anxiety attacks, retrieved dropped items, provided stability on uneven surfaces, and offered the kind of unwavering companionship that only a well-trained service animal could provide. The hotel's automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, releasing a blast of air conditioning that felt like heaven against Marcus's sun-warmed skin. The lobby was typical of mid-range hotels everywhere, with neutral colors, generic artwork, and the faint smell of industrial carpet cleaner mixed with coffee from the continental breakfast area. A few business travelers sat in the lobby chairs tapping away on their laptops, while a family with young children waited near the elevators with their luggage piled high on a cart. Marcus approached the front desk where a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a name tag reading Jennifer smiled brightly at him. Her smile faltered slightly when she noticed Atlas walking beside him, the dog's bright red service vest clearly visible with its official patches and identification. Marcus had grown accustomed to the various reactions people had to his service, dog ranging from curiosity to admiration to, unfortunately, skepticism and hostility. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today?" Jennifer asked, her voice maintaining its professional cheerfulness despite the uncertainty in her eyes as she glanced down at Atlas, who sat perfectly still at Marcus's feet, his intelligent brown eyes alert but calm. "I have a reservation under Rodriguez. I called ahead to confirm that you accommodate service animals," Marcus replied, pulling out his confirmation email on his phone and his military identification. He had learned early in his adjustment to civilian life that being proactive about his service dog often prevented misunderstandings and awkward confrontations later. Jennifer's fingers clicked rapidly across her keyboard as she pulled up his reservation. "Yes, here it is. Marcus Rodriguez, one night, checking out tomorrow morning." She paused, her brow furrowing slightly as she read something on her screen. "I see here that you mentioned a service animal, but I'm going to need to add a pet deposit and daily pet fee to your bill. It's hotel policy." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the beginning of the anxiety that Atlas was trained to detect and manage. The dog immediately stood and pressed his warm body against Marcus's leg, providing the grounding pressure that helped keep panic attacks at bay. Marcus took a deep breath and kept his voice steady and polite, drawing on years of military training that had taught him to remain calm under pressure. "Ma'am, Atlas is a service dog, not a pet. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, service animals are not subject to pet fees or deposits. I can provide his certification and my documentation if needed," Marcus explained, reaching into his wallet to retrieve the laminated cards that he had hoped he wouldn't need to use. The lobby continued its normal rhythm around them, but Marcus could sense that their conversation was beginning to draw attention from other guests. A middle-aged man in a business suit glanced over from where he was checking his email, and the family near the elevators had gone quiet, their children's chatter subsiding as they picked up on the tension developing at the front desk. Jennifer's expression hardened slightly, and she called over her shoulder to someone in the back office. "Michael, can you come out here for a minute?" Her voice carried a note of authority that suggested she was escalating the situation rather than trying to resolve it. Marcus felt Atlas lean more heavily against his leg, the dog's training kicking in as he sensed his handler's rising stress levels. A tall man in his 40s emerged from the office behind the front desk, his manager's name tag reading Michael Stevens, and his expression already suggesting that he viewed Marcus and Atlas as a problem to be solved rather than guests to be accommodated. Michael's eyes swept over Marcus's casual travel clothes, his prosthetic leg, and settled disapprovingly on Atlas, who remained perfectly still and professional despite the growing hostility in the air. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only Marcus's patience and advocacy skills, but also expose the ignorance and discrimination that too many service dog handlers faced in their daily lives. What should have been a simple hotel check-in was about to become something much more significant, a moment that would reveal both the worst and best of human nature in the span of just a few minutes. Michael Stevens walked around the front desk with the confident stride of someone who believed he was about to solve a problem quickly and efficiently. His eyes never left Atlas, studying the service dog with the suspicious gaze of someone looking for evidence to support a predetermined conclusion. Marcus recognized the look immediately, having encountered it countless times in restaurants, stores, and other establishments where his rights as a disabled veteran should have been automatically respected. "Sir, I understand you're trying to bring a pet into our hotel," Michael began, his tone suggesting that he had already decided how this conversation would end. "While we appreciate your service, our no-pet policy is very clear, and we can't make exceptions. However, we'd be happy to recommend a pet-friendly hotel about 15 minutes down the road." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but Atlas's steady presence against his leg helped him maintain his composure. "This is not a pet. This is my service dog. His name is Atlas, and he's been specifically trained to assist with my disability-related needs. Under federal law, you cannot charge fees for service animals, and you cannot refuse accommodation unless the animal poses a direct threat or is not housebroken." The lobby had grown noticeably quieter as other guests began to realize that something significant was happening at the front desk. The businessman had lowered his phone and was listening intently, while the family with children had moved closer, their parents clearly trying to understand what was unfolding. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, and he straightened his shoulders, drawing on the confidence and bearing that had served him well during his years as a Navy SEAL. Michael's expression remained skeptical as he crossed his arms over his chest. "Look, I've seen plenty of people try to pass off their pets as service animals just to avoid fees. How do I know this isn't just a regular dog with a vest you bought online? Anyone can get those vests these days. I'm going to need to see some serious documentation, and even then, I'm not sure we can accommodate you without the standard pet deposit." The ignorance and hostility in Michael's voice sparked something in Marcus that he usually kept carefully controlled. Atlas immediately sensed the change in his handler's emotional state and gently nudged Marcus's hand with his nose, a trained behavior designed to interrupt the rising anxiety and anger before it could escalate into a full panic attack. Marcus took a deep breath and reminded himself that education often worked better than confrontation. "I can provide documentation, but let me explain something to you," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to and obeyed. "I lost my leg in Afghanistan while serving this country. Atlas helps me maintain balance, retrieves items I drop, provides pressure therapy for anxiety attacks, and performs dozens of other tasks that allow me to live independently. He's not a pet any more than a wheelchair is furniture." Marcus pulled out his documentation, including his VA disability card, Atlas's service animal certification, and a letter from his doctor explaining the medical necessity of his service dog. He placed them on the counter one by one, his movements precise and controlled. "This is more documentation than the law requires me to provide, but I'm giving it to you anyway because I want to check into this hotel and get some rest." Jennifer glanced nervously between Marcus and Michael, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but uncertain how to proceed. The tension in the lobby was palpable now, with several guests openly watching the confrontation unfold. A woman in a business suit had moved closer to the front desk, her expression indicating that she was prepared to intervene if necessary. Michael picked up the documents and examined them with exaggerated scrutiny, taking far longer than necessary to read through information that should have been straightforward. "These could be fake," he said finally, his tone dismissive. "I've seen fake service dog certifications before, and even if they're real, our insurance policy requires a deposit for any animal on the property. No exceptions." Marcus felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same anger that had sustained him through months of painful rehabilitation and years of dealing with ignorant bureaucrats who seemed determined to make his life more difficult than it needed to be. Atlas pressed more firmly against his leg, and Marcus forced himself to count to 10 before responding. "Your insurance policy cannot supersede federal law," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "The Americans with Disabilities Act is very clear about this. You cannot charge deposits or fees for service animals. You cannot require documentation beyond asking 2 specific questions about the animal's training. And you certainly cannot refuse accommodation based on your personal opinions about the validity of my disability or my service dog's training." The businessman who had been watching the scene unfold suddenly stepped forward, his expression indignant. "Excuse me," he said to Michael, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I'm an attorney, and this gentleman is absolutely correct. What you're doing right now is a clear violation of the ADA. And you're opening this hotel up to significant liability." Michael's confidence wavered slightly, but he remained stubborn. "Sir, I appreciate your input, but this is hotel business and I need to follow our policies. If he wants to stay here, he needs to pay the pet deposit. That's final." The woman in the business suit moved closer to the desk, her expression fierce. "I'm a veteran too, and this is absolutely disgusting. This man served our country and lost his leg defending our freedom. And you're going to charge him extra for the service dog that helps him walk? You should be ashamed of yourself." Marcus realized that the situation was escalating beyond his control, but not in the way he had expected. Instead of being isolated and forced to fight this battle alone, he found himself surrounded by strangers who were willing to stand up for his rights. The warmth of their support was almost overwhelming, and he felt Atlas lean against him as the dog sensed his emotional response to the unexpected solidarity. Michael looked around the lobby nervously, clearly realizing that he had seriously misjudged the situation and that his position was becoming increasingly untenable. But instead of backing down gracefully, he doubled down on his stance, setting the stage for a confrontation that would soon spiral far beyond anything he had anticipated. The tension in the lobby reached a breaking point as Michael Stevens realized he was facing more opposition than he had expected. His face reddened with embarrassment and anger, but instead of admitting his mistake, he chose to escalate the situation further. The small crowd of hotel guests who had gathered to support Marcus only seemed to make Michael more defensive and determined to assert his authority. "Look, I don't care who you people think you are or what you think you know about the law," Michael said, his voice rising to a level that could be heard throughout the lobby. "I am the manager of this hotel, and I make the decisions about who stays here and under what conditions. This man will pay the pet deposit and the daily pet fee, or he will find somewhere else to stay. End of discussion." Marcus felt a cold fury settle over him, the kind of controlled rage that had served him well in combat situations where clear thinking under pressure meant the difference between life and death. Atlas sensed the change immediately and moved to a position where he could provide maximum support if his handler needed it. The dog's training had prepared him for exactly this kind of situation, where his veteran's stress levels could spike dangerously. "You're making a serious mistake," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded men in life or death situations. "I'm going to give you one more opportunity to do the right thing here. Check me into my room without any additional fees, and we can pretend this conversation never happened. Continue down this path, and I promise you will regret it." The lawyer who had stepped forward earlier pulled out his business card and placed it on the counter. "I want to make sure I have your name and the name of this hotel correct," he said to Michael, taking out his phone to document the encounter. "Because I'm going to be filing a complaint with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division first thing tomorrow morning, and I want to make sure I spell everything correctly." Michael's face went pale as he realized the potential legal implications of his stance, but his pride prevented him from backing down gracefully. Instead, he made the decision that would transform this from a simple customer service failure into a much more serious situation. He reached for the phone behind the front desk and began dialing. If you people don't disperse and allow me to run my business, I'm calling the police to have you removed for trespassing," Michael announced loudly. "This is private property and I have the right to refuse service to anyone for any reason." The veteran woman shook her head in disgust. "You absolutely do not have the right to refuse service based on disability. That's exactly what the Civil Rights Act was designed to prevent. You're about to make this situation so much worse for yourself in this hotel." Marcus remained calm, but his mind was already working through the implications of Michael's threat. As a former Navy SEAL, he had been trained to assess situations quickly and prepare for multiple possible outcomes. He knew that when the police arrived, the situation would either be resolved quickly in his favor, or it could potentially escalate into something more serious if the responding officers were not properly trained on AD law. "Atlas, stay," Marcus commanded quietly, and the service dog immediately moved into a perfect sit position, demonstrating the kind of precise obedience that only came from extensive professional training. The crowd of supportive guests murmured their approval at the dog's obvious discipline and training, which stood in stark contrast to Michael's claims that Atlas was just a pet with a fake vest. Jennifer, the front desk clerk, looked mortified as she watched her manager dig himself deeper into a hole that would likely result in serious consequences for both him and the hotel. She had recognized from the beginning that Marcus's documentation was legitimate and that Atlas was clearly a professional service animal, but she lacked the authority to override her manager's decisions. Michael finished dialing and spoke into the phone with exaggerated authority. "Yes, I need police officers at the Grand Vista Hotel immediately. I have several people here who are refusing to leave after I've asked them to go. They're trespassing and disrupting my business." He provided the hotel's address and hung up with a satisfied expression, clearly believing that he had just solved his problem. The lawyer shook his head and continued taking notes on his phone. "I want to make sure I document this correctly for the federal complaint. You just called the police on a disabled veteran because he refused to pay illegal fees for his service dog. You understand that what you're doing is not just morally wrong, but a federal crime under the Americans with Disabilities Act?" Marcus pulled out his own phone and began recording the encounter, a skill he had learned from other veterans who had faced similar discrimination. "For the record," he said clearly into the phone's microphone, "my name is Marcus Rodriguez. I am a disabled veteran with a legitimate service dog named Atlas. I have provided all required documentation, proving both my disability and my dog's training. The manager of this hotel, Michael Stevens, has demanded that I pay pet fees for my service dog, which is illegal under federal law. When I refused to pay these illegal fees, he called the police to have me removed for trespassing." The small crowd of guests continued to grow as word of the confrontation spread through the lobby. Several people were now recording the encounter on their phones, and Marcus could see that the situation was becoming something much larger than a simple dispute about hotel policy. Social media had taught people that these kinds of confrontations often went viral, and there was a sense of anticipation in the air as everyone waited to see how the situation would resolve. Michael seemed oblivious to the fact that he was being recorded by multiple people and that his behavior was being documented for potential legal proceedings. His confidence in his position remained unshaken, even as the evidence mounted that he was completely wrong both legally and morally. The sound of sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder as they approached the hotel. Marcus took a deep breath and prepared himself for the next phase of this confrontation, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether justice would be served or whether he would be forced to fight this battle in court. Atlas sensed his handler's preparation for action and subtly shifted his position to be ready to provide whatever support might be needed. The police sirens grew louder until they stopped abruptly in the hotel parking lot, followed by the sound of car doors slamming and heavy footsteps approaching the building. Marcus stood perfectly still, his hands visible and his posture non-threatening, drawing on years of military training that had taught him how to interact with law enforcement in potentially volatile situations. Atlas remained in his perfect sit position, his professional demeanor serving as a stark contrast to Michael's claims about him being an untrained pet. Two officers entered the lobby, their eyes immediately scanning the scene to assess the situation. The first officer was a tall, thin man in his 30s with sergeant stripes on his uniform and the bearing of someone with significant experience. His partner was a younger woman, probably in her mid-20s, with alert eyes that took in every detail of the scene before them. Both officers carried themselves with the professional competence that Marcus recognized and respected. Michael immediately rushed toward the officers, his voice loud and agitated. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. These people are trespassing and refusing to leave my property. I asked them to go and they won't listen. I need you to remove them immediately." Sergeant Williams, according to his name tag, held up a hand to slow Michael down. "Let's start from the beginning, sir. What exactly is the problem here?" His eyes moved deliberately around the lobby, taking in the crowd of guests, many of whom were still recording the encounter on their phones and settling on Marcus and Atlas. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his military bearing immediately apparent to the experienced sergeant. "Officer, my name is Marcus Rodriguez. I'm a disabled veteran, and this is my service dog, Atlas. I have a confirmed reservation at this hotel, but the manager is demanding that I pay pet fees for my service animal, which violates federal law. When I refused to pay illegal fees, he called you to have me removed for trespassing." The younger officer, Officer Chen, according to her badge, immediately focused on Atlas, her expression showing recognition of a professionally trained service animal. She had clearly received proper training on disability rights and service animal law, something that was becoming more common as police departments educated their officers about ADA compliance. "Can you show me your documentation?" Sergeant Williams asked Marcus, his tone professional and neutral. Marcus immediately produced his military ID, his VA disability card, and Atlas's service animal certification. The sergeant examined the documents carefully, while Officer Chen observed Atlas's behavior, noting the dog's perfect positioning, calm demeanor, and obvious training. Michael interrupted impatiently. "Officers, I don't care what kind of documentation he has. This is my hotel, and I have the right to set policies about animals on the property. I want these people removed for trespassing, and I want it done now." Sergeant Williams turned to Michael with an expression that suggested his patience was wearing thin. "Sir, I need you to calm down and let me handle this situation. Can you explain to me exactly what fees you're trying to charge this gentleman? For a service dog, we charge a $50 pet deposit and a $25 daily pet fee for all animals," Michael replied, his voice still aggressive and demanding. "I don't care if it's a service dog or not. Hotel policy is hotel policy, and if he doesn't like it, he can find somewhere else to stay." Officer Chen stepped forward, her expression serious. "Sir, are you aware that charging fees for service animals is a violation of federal law under the Americans with Disabilities Act? Service animals are not pets, and they are specifically exempted from any deposits or fees that hotels might charge for pets." The lawyer who had been supporting Marcus from the beginning stepped forward and handed his business card to Sergeant Williams. "Officer, I'm an attorney, and I've been witnessing this entire encounter. This gentleman's rights have been clearly violated, and the hotel manager has been repeatedly informed that his demands are illegal. He chose to escalate the situation by calling you rather than complying with federal law." Sergeant Williams examined the attorney's card and then looked around the lobby at the crowd of witnesses, many of whom were nodding in agreement. "Sir," he said to Michael, "it appears that you have a room full of witnesses who disagree with your interpretation of the law. Can you show me the specific hotel policy that allows you to charge fees for service animals?" Michael's confidence began to waver as he realized that the officers were not simply going to remove Marcus and the other guests without investigating the situation thoroughly. "Well, our general pet policy states that all animals require deposits and fees. We don't make exceptions. That policy is illegal when applied to service animals," Officer Chen said firmly. "You cannot charge deposits or fees for service animals. You cannot require special documentation beyond asking if the animal is a service animal and what task it has been trained to perform. And you certainly cannot refuse accommodation to a disabled person because of their service animal." The veteran woman who had been supporting Marcus spoke up. "Officers, this man served our country and lost his leg in Afghanistan. The way he's being treated here is absolutely shameful. All he wants is to check into his room and get some rest." Sergeant Williams nodded thoughtfully and turned back to Marcus. "Sir, can you tell me what specific tasks your service dog has been trained to perform?" "Atlas provides mobility support for my prosthetic leg, helps me maintain balance on uneven surfaces, retrieves dropped items, provides deep pressure therapy for anxiety attacks, and performs several other tasks related to my service-connected disabilities. Marcus replied clearly and concisely. Officer Chen observed Atlas throughout this explanation, noting how the dog remained perfectly focused on his handler, occasionally providing subtle support touches when Marcus shifted his weight. "This is clearly a professionally trained service animal," she said to her partner. "His behavior, positioning, and responses are textbook examples of proper service dog training." Sergeant Williams turned back to Michael, his expression serious. "Sir, I need to inform you that you are in violation of federal disability rights law. You have two choices here. You can check this gentleman into his room immediately without any additional fees, or you can face federal civil rights charges and potential prosecution for disability discrimination." Michael's face went through a series of expressions as he realized that his position was not just wrong, but potentially criminal. The crowd of witnesses, the recordings being made, and the clear knowledge of the law demonstrated by the police officers had created a situation where he could no longer maintain his stubborn stance without facing serious consequences. The moment of truth had arrived, and everyone in the lobby waited to see whether Michael would finally do the right thing or continue down a path that would lead to his professional and personal destruction. Michael Stevens stood frozen behind the front desk, his face cycling through shades of red and white as the full weight of his situation became clear. The lobby had fallen silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the occasional click of phone cameras still documenting the encounter. Everyone waited to see whether he would finally acknowledge his mistake or continue digging himself deeper into legal and professional trouble. Sergeant Williams stepped closer to the front desk, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to diffusing potentially explosive situations. "Mr. Stevens, I'm going to explain this one more time in very simple terms. You have violated federal law by attempting to charge fees for a service animal. You have compounded that violation by calling police to remove a disabled veteran from your hotel for asserting his legal rights. You now have approximately 30 seconds to correct this situation, or I will be placing you under arrest for violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act." The threat of arrest seemed to finally penetrate Michael's stubborn pride. His shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he looked genuinely uncertain about his position. Jennifer, the front desk clerk, stepped forward and quietly said, "Michael, just check him in, please. This has gone far enough." Officer Chen moved to stand beside Marcus, her presence clearly indicating which side of this conflict had the law on their side. "Mr. Rodriguez, I want you to know that we take disability rights violations very seriously in this jurisdiction. If you choose to file charges against this hotel and its manager, our department will fully support your complaint." Marcus looked down at Atlas, who gazed back at him with the calm, trusting expression that had helped him through countless difficult moments over the past 3 years. The dog had remained perfectly behaved throughout the entire confrontation, demonstrating exactly the kind of professional training that Michael had questioned. "I just want to check into my room and get some rest," Marcus said quietly. "I'm not looking for trouble, but I won't be discriminated against either." The lawyer who had been documenting the encounter stepped forward with his phone still recording. "Mr. Stevens, I want to make sure you understand that even if you check this gentleman in now, you've still committed federal crimes that could result in significant fines and criminal charges. Your best option at this point is to cooperate fully and hope that Mr. Rodriguez chooses not to press charges." Michael finally seemed to grasp the seriousness of his situation. His voice was much quieter when he spoke again. "Mr. Rodriguez, I apologize for the confusion. Let me get you checked in right now." His hands shook slightly as he turned to his computer terminal and began processing the reservation without any additional fees. The crowd of supporters began to murmur approvingly, but Sergeant Williams held up a hand to maintain order. "Let's let them finish the check-in process before we celebrate," he said diplomatically. "Mr. Stevens, I want to see you process this reservation exactly as you would for any other guest, with no additional fees or charges." Jennifer stepped in to help complete the check-in process, her movements efficient and professional as she printed the room keys and prepared the welcome packet. "You're in room 314, Mr. Rodriguez. The elevators are just around the corner and breakfast is served from 6 to 10 in the morning. Is there anything else I can help you with?" Marcus accepted the room keys and smiled genuinely for the first time since entering the hotel. Thank you. That's exactly what I needed. Atlas remained perfectly positioned at his side, ready to provide whatever assistance might be needed as they headed toward the elevators. Officer Chen approached Marcus before he could leave. Sir, I want to give you my card in case you decide to file a formal complaint. What happened here tonight was completely unacceptable, and there should be consequences for this kind of discrimination. The veteran woman who had been one of Marcus's strongest supporters stepped forward as well. I want you to know how much I admire your patience and dignity throughout this whole ordeal. You handled yourself with honor, and you made all of us proud to be Americans. Sergeant Williams turned back to Michael, his expression serious. Mr. Stevens, I strongly recommend that you and your staff receive immediate training on disability rights and service animal law. This incident could have resulted in serious criminal charges and massive liability for your hotel. Consider yourself fortunate that Mr. Rodriguez is more interested in getting some rest than in pursuing legal action. Marcus gathered his duffel bag and moved toward the elevators with Atlas walking perfectly at his side. The small crowd of supporters began to disperse, many of them stopping to shake his hand or offer words of encouragement. The lawyer pressed his business card into Marcus's hand and whispered, "If you change your mind about filing charges, call me. This kind of discrimination needs to have consequences." As the elevator doors closed behind Marcus and Atlas, the lobby slowly returned to its normal, quiet rhythm. But the impact of what had just transpired would extend far beyond this single evening. Several people in the crowd were already posting videos of the encounter on social media, and the story would soon spread far beyond the walls of the Grand Vista Hotel. Michael stood behind the front desk, his face pale and his confidence completely shattered. He was beginning to understand that his stubborn pride and ignorance of federal law had just created a public relations disaster for his hotel and potentially put his own job in jeopardy. The next few hours would bring phone calls from corporate headquarters, angry reviews on social media, and the realization that his few minutes of power tripping had consequences that would last much longer than he had ever imagined. Jennifer looked at her manager with a mixture of disappointment and concern, knowing that this incident would likely result in major changes at the hotel and possibly the end of Michael's career in hospitality management. The night shift was just beginning, but already it felt like everything had changed forever. The elevator ride to the third floor was blissfully quiet after the chaos of the lobby confrontation. Marcus leaned against the wall and felt some of the tension finally leaving his shoulders as Atlas pressed against his leg, providing the steady comfort that had become so essential to his daily life. When the doors opened on his floor, Marcus walked slowly down the carpeted hallway, his prosthetic leg aching from the stress and extended standing of the past hour. Room 314 was a standard hotel room with 2 queen beds, a small desk, and a view of the parking lot where he could see the police cars still parked near the entrance. Marcus dropped his duffel bag on the bed closer to the door and immediately went to fill Atlas's water bowl from the bathroom tap. The service dog drank gratefully, then settled onto his designated sleeping mat with a contented sigh that seemed to mirror his handler's relief. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone to call his wife. "Sarah, back home in Colorado." She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with concern. "How's the drive going, honey? Are you getting some rest?" "Well, it's been an interesting evening," Marcus said with a tired laugh. "I just had to educate a hotel manager about service dog laws, with help from the local police department." He gave Sarah a brief summary of the confrontation, downplaying the stress and focusing on the positive outcome. "I'm so proud of how you handled that," Sarah said when he finished the story. "A few years ago, that kind of confrontation would have sent you into a panic attack that lasted for hours. Look how far you've come." Her voice carried the love and admiration that had sustained him through the darkest periods of his recovery. As they talked, Marcus's phone began buzzing with notifications from social media platforms. Several people from the hotel lobby had tagged him in posts about the incident, and the videos were already being shared widely. One post from the veteran woman had already received hundreds of supportive comments praising Marcus's dignity and condemning the hotel's discrimination. After ending the call with Sarah, Marcus scrolled through some of the social media posts, amazed at how quickly the story was spreading. The lawyer who had supported him had posted a detailed account of the incident with legal commentary about disability rights violations. Several veteran support organizations had already shared the story, and the hotel was receiving dozens of negative reviews criticizing their treatment of disabled guests. Around midnight, Marcus was awakened by his phone ringing. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar local number, but something prompted him to answer. "Mr. Rodriguez, this is Captain Martinez from the Phoenix Police Department. I wanted to personally apologize for what happened at the Grand Vista Hotel tonight and to let you know that we take these kinds of civil rights violations very seriously." Captain Martinez explained that the incident had come to his attention through social media and that he had reviewed the reports filed by his officers. "I want you to know that this police department stands firmly behind disability rights, and we would fully support any decision you make to file federal charges against the hotel or its manager." Marcus thanked the captain for his call and his department's professionalism. "Your officers handled the situation perfectly. They knew the law, they remained professional, and they made sure my rights were protected. That meant more to me than you probably realize." The next morning brought even more developments. Marcus woke to find that the story had been picked up by several news outlets, and his phone was ringing with requests for interviews. The Grand Vista Hotel's corporate office had already issued a public apology and announced that Michael Stevens had been terminated effective immediately. The entire hotel chain was implementing mandatory disability rights training for all employees. Jennifer, the front desk clerk, knocked on his door around 8 in the morning to personally deliver a formal apology letter from the hotel's regional manager and to offer a full refund for his stay along with compensation for the discrimination he had experienced. "I'm so sorry about last night," she said sincerely. "Michael was completely wrong and I should have spoken up sooner to stop him." Marcus accepted her apology gracefully, understanding that she had been in a difficult position with her manager. "You are professional throughout the whole situation, and I appreciate that. I hope this incident leads to better training and policies that prevent other disabled guests from facing the same discrimination." As Marcus checked out later that morning, he was approached by several other hotel guests who had witnessed the confrontation. Many shared their own stories of discrimination or expressed gratitude for his patience and dignity in handling such a difficult situation. The businessman who had first spoken up in his defense shook his hand firmly and said, "You conducted yourself like the warrior you are, both last night and this morning." The drive home to Colorado gave Marcus time to reflect on the incident and its aftermath. What had started as a simple discrimination encounter had become something much larger, sparking conversations about disability rights, veteran treatment, and the importance of standing up for justice even when it was difficult and uncomfortable. Atlas slept peacefully in the passenger seat, occasionally waking to check on his handler before settling back into his travel position. The service dog had performed flawlessly throughout the entire ordeal, demonstrating exactly the kind of professional behavior that made him so essential to Marcus's independence and well-being. Over the following weeks, Marcus received hundreds of messages from other veterans, disabled individuals, and service dog handlers who shared their own stories of discrimination and expressed gratitude for his willingness to stand up for his rights. The incident at the Grand Vista Hotel had become a teaching moment that reached far beyond a single hotel lobby in Phoenix. The legal consequences for Michael Stevens extended beyond just losing his job. Federal investigators opened a civil rights investigation that would follow him throughout his career in hospitality management. The Grand Vista Hotel implemented comprehensive policy changes and became a model for other hotels in how to properly accommodate disabled guests and service animals. For Marcus, the incident served as a reminder of how far he had come in his recovery journey. A few years earlier, such a confrontation would have triggered severe panic attacks and left him unable to advocate for himself effectively. Now, with Atlas's support and his own hard-won confidence, he had been able to stand firm for his rights while maintaining his dignity and composure. Most importantly, the incident sparked broader conversations about the challenges faced by disabled veterans and the ongoing need for education about disability rights. Marcus's story became a powerful example of how one person's courage to stand up for justice could create positive change that extended far beyond their own immediate situation.